The first thing I remember is the sound of metal groaning under its own weight and the smell of burnt rubber drifting across the empty highway. Dawn had barely broken, washing the world in pale orange light when I pulled my rig onto the shoulder near mile marker 214. I stepped out expecting debris, a blown tire, maybe a stranded commuter. Instead, I found a man collapsing into my arms, blood soaking through the fabric of a government-issue windbreaker he was barely conscious enough to hold shut. He looked up at me with those sharp, ice-blue eyes that only men who've stared down hell seem to have, and before I could ask what happened, he whispered the two words that punched the breath out of me. Drive now. Not help me, not call 911, but drive now. Something in his voice carried the weight of final chances, like dawn wasn't the beginning of a new day but the last sliver of safety we had left. I didn't know his name yet, only that death was riding his shadow. When I hauled him into the cab, he winced but didn't scream. Federal badge clipped to his belt, bullet graze across his ribs, dirt and sweat smeared across a face that had seen more than any man should. As I started the engine, I noticed his hands trembling as he locked the passenger door twice. He kept checking the mirrors, scanning the tree line like he expected something to crawl out of it and drag us back into the night. Then he finally told me his name, Agent Callum Ryden, and he told me someone wasn't just after him. They were close, too close. As I merged back onto the open road, the early morning air felt colder than it should have. The sky was clear, but something in the silence made my instincts itch like sandpaper against skin. Callum kept swallowing pain, each breath shaky, eyes sharp but fading. He asked if I'd seen any other vehicles nearby, any black SUVs, any unmarked sedans. I told him no, but even as I said it, a heavy question sank into my gut. If no one was on the road this early, how did he end up bleeding in the middle of it? The diesel hummed low beneath us, steady but tense, like even the engine sensed the unease crawling into the cab. As the sun climbed higher, streaks of amber cut across Callum's face, lighting the desperation in his expression. He told me he had information someone would kill for, that the people hunting him didn't care who got in the way, and his voice cracked when he said I should have kept driving when I saw him. I told him men like me don't leave the wounded behind. Not on a highway, not on my watch. Before he could reply, a faint glint in the rearview mirror caught my eye, a shape far back on the asphalt, too far to identify, too steady to be casual traffic. It moved with purpose, with patience, with hunger. And in that moment, with the morning sun rising and the world stretching open before us, I realized the truth in Callum's warning. Whatever hurt him wasn't finished. If you're still here with me, listening to this story as the wheels keep turning, do me a favor, hit the like button. Not for numbers, not for vanity. Do it because out here on the road, moments like this decide who lives and who doesn't. Stories like Callum's remind us how fragile the line is between safety and danger, and how one stranger's courage can rewrite fate. Your support helps these warnings reach someone who might one day need them. The rising sun stretched long shadows across the highway as I pushed the rig faster, the trailer whining under the strain. The shape in the rearview mirror had sharpened into a distant vehicle, black and low to the ground, holding our speed like it was tethered to us. Callum spotted it too. His jaw tightened, and for a moment the fear behind his eyes eclipsed the pain in his body. He told me it wasn't a random tale. It was them, whoever them was. He said they didn't stop until the target stopped breathing. He shifted in the seat and winced, pulling his jacket open just long enough for me to see the blood seeping through his shirt. The wound wasn't clean. It wasn't a simple bullet graze. It was deep, jagged, like someone wanted him alive but compliant. That did something to me, made my hands grip the wheel tighter, made my chest heat with anger I didn't expect to feel for a stranger. He wasn't just hurt, he'd been hunted, and now, because I stopped, so were we. Traffic was thin, the kind of light flow you only see on roads that stretch through forgotten plains. The sky was wide, cloudless, too peaceful for what was unfolding. Callum kept glancing at the mirror, muttering calculations, memorizing distances. He said we had minutes, maybe less, before they closed the gap. I asked him what was so important that people would chase him past sunrise. He took a shaky breath and said it wasn't what he carried, it was what he knew. The wind picked up, sweeping across the fields and rattling the loose metal on the trailer. The vibrations crawled through the floor panels and up into my boots, echoing the tension burning in my chest. My rig was a beast, dependable and loyal, but not built for high-speed runs. Still, I pushed miles out of her like she was made of tempered fire. Callum nodded with something like respect when he felt the acceleration. He told me not many truckers would risk everything for a stranger. I told him sometimes the road chooses who you protect. The vehicle behind us grew larger in the mirror, its windows dark, its movements precise. Not drifting, not curious, tracking. Callum's breathing sped up. He pressed his hand against his wound, then reached for the glove compartment, searching for anything he could use as a weapon. I told him he wasn't dying in my cab. Not today. Not under my watch. Something softened in his expression, something that looked suspiciously like trust, and he whispered that he hoped I was right. The air in the cab thickened as the distance closed. The sun was higher now, lighting the world in gold, but nothing about the morning felt safe. My heart thudded against my ribs like a fist begging to break free. Callum leaned forward, eyes locked on the approaching threat. He whispered that this was only the beginning, that once they caught sight of us, the hunt would change. I didn't understand what he meant until the vehicle behind us flashed its headlights 3 times, slow and deliberate. A signal, not a warning, a promise. The black car behind us closed the distance with an unsettling calm, like a shark gliding through clear water. Sunlight glinted off its windshield, but I still couldn't see the driver. That wasn't normal. At this angle, with this much daylight, I should have been able to catch a silhouette, a face, something. Instead, it looked like an empty shell piloting itself down the highway. Callum cursed under his breath and wiped sweat from his forehead, his fingers shaking as he braced himself against the dashboard. He said the vehicle wasn't standard issue, said the people after him didn't operate under government protocol. They were something else, a group that lived in the cracks between agencies, doing work too ugly to be traced. He told me their name in a whisper so thin it felt like it didn't belong in the daylight. The Carrion unit. Men who cleaned up the truths no one wanted to exist. Men who erased witnesses instead of filing reports. And men who, according to Callum, didn't lose their targets. The road ahead stretched in a long ribbon of asphalt, shimmering from the rising heat. The plains on either side were empty, save for a few lonely power lines cutting across the horizon. It was the kind of place where screams didn't echo, and help didn't come. Callum's voice dropped as he told me they were supposed to take him alive for questioning, but after he escaped with what he knew, the orders changed. Now they needed a body, preferably one that didn't talk. I felt a cold pulse in my chest hearing that. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a soldier. I was just a trucker with a code I refused to break. But as their car drew closer, a fire built inside me. Anger at the way he'd been hunted, at the way they treated the open road like their personal battlefield. I wasn't going to let him die in my cab, not while I was still breathing and the rig still had diesel in her veins. The car made its first move. It drifted left, then right, testing the lanes, studying my reactions. Callum straightened, pain etched into his features, and told me to be ready. I asked what for, but he didn't answer with words. He pointed, and that's when I saw it. The passenger window of the black car rolling down. Slow. Too slow. A hand, gloved in matte black, slipped out, gripping something metallic. Not a gun. Something worse. Something shaped like a launcher designed to cripple engines from 50 yards. Instinct jolted through me like electricity. I swerved just as a pulse of blue-white light fired from the device, missing my trailer by inches. The impact hit the asphalt instead, crackling like lightning trapped in glass. The road sizzled where it struck. Callum grabbed the overhead handle, holding himself steady as the rig wavered. He shouted at me to keep moving, to not let them get a clean shot. I told him I didn't need the reminder. I stomped the accelerator and felt the engine roar like a beast waking from a nightmare. The cab rattled, the trailer groaned, and the wheels screamed against the asphalt as we picked up speed. The Carrion unit matched us effortlessly, staying just out of reach but never backing off. I could feel their gaze through the tinted glass, cold and unblinking, like wolves waiting for us to stumble. Callum's breathing grew uneven, the pain getting to him, but he forced himself to stay conscious. He whispered that if they caught us, they wouldn't finish the job quickly. They'd make him talk first. They'd make me disappear second. The matter-of-fact tone in his voice chilled me deeper than the threat itself, but I kept my hand steady on the wheel because there was one thing he didn't know. Men who live on the road learn how to survive hunts too. The car changed lanes again, inching closer, lining up for another shot. The launcher lifted, and that's when I realized they weren't just hunting him, they were hunting us both now. The launcher in the gloved hand steadied, aimed directly at the side of my trailer. Morning sunlight flashed across the metal as the black car drifted closer, its tires hugging the asphalt with surgical precision. I felt a throb of fear pulse through my chest, but the instinct to protect, sharp, old, unbreakable, rose faster. I jerked the wheel just as the weapon fired, and a bolt of crackling energy tore past us, exploding against the guardrail in a shower of blue sparks. Callum gritted his teeth, gripping the seat like he was wrestling his own failing strength. He muttered that the Carrion unit didn't use weapons the public recognized. They used prototypes, tools meant for extraction and elimination without leaving evidence behind. If they were pulling out heavy tech this early in the chase, It meant their orders had shifted from capture to cleanup, and cleanup meant they couldn't let either of us survive the next hour, let alone the next mile. The black car surged forward again, riding the blind spot on my left. I swung right, forcing my rig into the emergency lane. Dust and gravel spat up as the tires screamed, the trailer swaying dangerously. The engine roared, its heat rising through the floorboards in waves. The smell of diesel mixed with scorched metal as the highway trembled under our weight. I prayed the rig stayed upright because if she tipped, we'd be nothing but memory and wreckage before the sun hit noon. Callum's hand shot out and pointed ahead. A narrow cutoff road branched to the right, half hidden behind a worn sign warning trucks to avoid the turn. I told him we'd jackknife if I took it at this speed. He said the alternative was a pulse round straight through our engine block. I chose the turn. I slammed the brakes just enough to keep traction, twisted the wheel hard, and felt the whole cab tilt as the trailer whipped behind us like a snapping chain. For a moment, gravity lost meaning. The world spun sideways. My vision blurred with dust and sunlight. Then the rig slammed back into line, tires gripping the cracked pavement of the cut-off road. The cab rattled violently, but we stayed upright. Behind us, the black car overshot the turn, skidding across the shoulder before correcting with impossible control. It drifted back into pursuit, closing in again like it had memorized every move before we made it. The cut-off road was rough, patched with uneven asphalt and lined with tall fields that swayed under the rising sun. Birds scattered overhead, taking flight in chaotic bursts as we tore through the quiet countryside. The engine growled, pushing itself harder than I'd ever dared to ask from her. But the road wasn't built for speed. Every bump, every crack, every sudden dip sent shudders through the cab. Callum pressed a shaking hand against his wound, his face pale beneath the streaks of dirt and sweat. He told me he could hold on, but the way his eyes glazed between breaths told me the opposite. Still, he forced himself upright, told me the Carrion unit didn't expect us to fight this hard, told me that if we made it past the ridge up ahead, he could show me a trick he learned from the people hunting him, something that might buy us time. The road narrowed as we climbed the ridge, sunlight washing over the hood of the truck. The view ahead stretched for miles, but behind us, the black car crested the hill like a predator, locking onto its wounded prey. The launcher lifted again, glinting cold and merciless in the morning light. I felt the weight of the moment settle into my spine. They weren't slowing down, and neither were we. The ridge leveled out into a long stretch of cracked pavement, sunlight beating down on the hood like a warning flare. Heat shimmered above the road in wavering sheets, bending the horizon just enough to make distance unreliable. The black car followed us over the crest with unsettling precision, its engine growling low beneath the hum of its prototype systems. Callum tensed, staring at it like he knew exactly what would happen next, and feared it anyway. He pushed himself upright, bracing against the dashboard, breath rattling through clenched teeth. He told me the Carrion unit had a failsafe for runaway targets, a short-range disruptor capable of frying electronics within a 30-foot radius. Vehicles, communication equipment, pacemakers, anything with a circuit. He said the fact they hadn't used it yet meant the operative wanted a clean extraction, no collateral damage, no blackouts the public could question. But now that we'd dodged them twice, their patience was wearing thin, and the ridge was the perfect place to unleash hell without witnesses. The wind picked up hard, sweeping across the open plateau and rattling the trailer like a taunt. Dust swirled in tight spirals on the roadside, rising in smoky plumes that glittered with fractured sunlight. I kept the rig steady, hands firm on the wheel, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the endless stretch of road ahead. But the car behind us was gaining. The long, sleek body cut through the air with unnatural smoothness as if physics bent out of respect or fear. Callum reached for the glove box again, and this time he pulled out something small and metallic. Not a weapon, a transmitter, bent at the edge, cracked down the side. He said it was stolen tech, something he'd pulled off their own devices during an intel collection gone wrong. He'd never meant to run, but when he discovered what they were planning, escape had become the only option. He didn't say what he'd seen. He didn't need to. The terror in his voice told me enough. The transmitter sparked weakly when he pressed a button on the back, emitting a faint pulse that made the cab lights flicker. He cursed under his breath. Too damaged, too unstable, but not useless. He said it could jam the disruptor for a few seconds, just long enough to keep the rig alive. The catch was simple and deadly. Someone had to activate it manually from outside the truck. I looked at him, bleeding and half-conscious, and understood the unspoken truth. It had to be me. The black car closed in, its engine snarling as if it sensed our indecision. The passenger window rolled down again, revealing the same gloved hand, this time holding something smaller, sleeker, a disruptor trigger. The weapon tilted upward, charging with a low hum that made the hairs on my arms stand straight. Callum's eyes widened. He shouted my name, voice cracking with urgency, telling me it was now or never. I scanned the roadside, heart pounding. A narrow pull-off sat just ahead, barely large enough for the rig but shielded by a wall of sun-baked rock. It wouldn't hide us, but it would give me 5 seconds of cover. That was all we needed. I slammed the brakes, twisted the wheel, and felt the entire trailer skid sideways across the ridge, tires shrieking under the strain. The black car overshot the turn, drifting wide before circling back with predatory grace. I didn't wait. I grabbed the transmitter, threw open the door, and jumped down onto the scorching asphalt. Heat shot through my boots. Sun hammered my back. The truck rattled behind me, the engine trembling like it sensed the incoming strike. Callum shouted something I couldn't hear over the roar of blood in my ears. I ran to the side of the rig, found the panel he described, and pressed the transmitter against it with everything I had left. It sparked once, then twice. Then it detonated in a burst of white static, sending a shockwave of fractured energy rippling down the length of the truck. The disruptor charge fired at the same moment from the black car, but the beam faltered midair, collapsing into fizzing embers that dissolved before reaching us. For the first time since dawn broke, we had the advantage, but only for a heartbeat, because as the static faded, I saw the black car repositioning. Slow, deliberate, hungry. The hunt wasn't over, it was evolving. The sun reached its highest point, turning the ridge into a furnace of white heat and biting glare. Every shadow shrank beneath our feet, leaving nowhere to hide on the open plateau. I could feel sweat slip down my spine as I hauled myself back into the cab, slamming the door just as the black car angled toward us again. Callum grabbed my arm the moment I sat, checking if I was hit, but I shook him off and pushed the rig into gear. We didn't have the luxury of checking wounds, not when death was 30 yards behind us. The transmitter, now nothing but a smoking shard of metal, lay on the floor between us. It had bought us 5 seconds, maybe 6, and even that was more mercy than we deserved. Callum wiped blood from his jaw and told me the disruptor wouldn't fire again immediately. It needed a cooldown cycle. That meant the unit operative would switch tactics, and fast. They'd try to box us in, force a crash, bring us down the old-fashioned way. And from the way the black car sped up alongside us, he was right. I swung the rig back onto the main road, tires screaming as we thundered out of the pull-off. Dust billowed behind us in rolling clouds, swallowed by the desert wind before the car could catch up. The engine rumbled, hot and furious, like it knew we were forcing her past her limits. The steering wheel vibrated under my hands, the kind of deep rattle that warned of overworked pistons. But I pushed her harder anyway. The sun glared off the windshield, blinding at points, turning the world into a mirror of light and danger. Callum sat rigid, one hand gripping the seat, the other pressed against the wound that had darkened his shirt a deeper shade of red. He told me the operative chasing us wasn't just any hitman. He was someone who'd climbed through the ranks of the unit by never failing a mission, never leaving a body unclaimed, never missing a shot. The man's name was Silas Carrion, and Callum said it with the kind of dread only reserved for nightmares that wear a human face. The black car reappeared behind us, slipping through the haze like a phantom rising from heat distortion. It swerved left, then right, testing the angles again. Silas didn't rush. He didn't panic. His movements were deliberate, clinical, calculated. A man who hunted by letting his prey exhaust itself. Callum's breathing grew shallower as he watched the car, his voice barely above a whisper when he said Silas preferred making his targets run. It made the final moment cleaner, easier. My hands tightened on the wheel. I'd been around long enough to see cruelty dressed as discipline, violence masked as duty, but something about the way Silas stalked us, free of emotion, free of hesitation, stirred a rage in me I hadn't felt in years. No man deserved to be hunted like an animal, especially not one bleeding out and still fighting to stay alive long enough to expose whatever truth he carried. Callum wasn't just a target, he was a witness, a threat to the unit's secrets. The road dipped suddenly, falling into a sun-baked valley where the asphalt twisted between rocky outcrops. I took the descent fast, letting gravity give us momentum. The trailer groaned, tires skidding, but the rig held steady. The black car followed, engine snarling as it hugged the curve. Silas didn't give an inch, not one. Then Callum spotted something ahead, a service tunnel carved into the rock, part of an old maintenance route closed years ago. Its entrance yawned like the mouth of a dry beast, narrow, treacherous but shaded, and shade meant concealment. Callum said if we timed it right, if we hit the tunnel at full speed and used the darkness to break the line of sight, we might buy time, maybe enough to plan something, maybe enough to survive. I took the risk. I veered hard, aiming for the tunnel with the sun blazing at our backs. The rig lurched, the trailer fishtailing dangerously, but we cleared the entrance by inches, plunging from blinding daylight into near blackness. The sudden drop in temperature felt like stepping into a cold lung. The air shifted. Sounds tightened. Darkness swallowed everything but the red glow of the dash lights. The world outside vanished. But the echo behind us told me one thing with chilling certainty. Silas didn't stop at the entrance. He followed us in. Darkness swallowed us whole. The moment the rig plunged into the service tunnel, the world narrowed into a suffocating corridor of concrete and echoing engine noise. My headlights sliced through the black and trembling beams, illuminating dust suspended in the air like ash from an unseen fire. Callum pressed a bloody hand against the dash to steady himself, whispering that this tunnel wasn't on any modern map. Its age showed in every cracked wall and flickering overhead bulb. Behind us, the growl of Silas Corrin's engine rolled into the tunnel like a predator's breath. The reverberation amplified, bouncing off the narrow walls until it sounded like a pack of engines hunting us instead of one. I pushed the rig harder, even though the space was tight and the trailer scraped dangerously close to the walls. Sparks flew where metal kissed concrete. Tiny bursts of light swallowed instantly by the void. Callum lifted his head enough to look through the side mirror. The black car's headlights cut through the dark in twin spears of white. Sharp and unwavering, Silas didn't brake, didn't hesitate. He followed with an unnerving steadiness that made the tunnel feel even smaller. The sound of his tires against the rough ground crawled into my skull like a warning carved in stone. The man wasn't human in the ways that mattered. He had patience where panic should have been. Precision where fear belonged. The tunnel curved, plunging deeper underground. The temperature dropped, cold air rushing into the cab like the breath of an old crypt. The diesel fumes twisted into the stale scent of dust and forgotten machinery. Overhead, a line of broken lights flickered sporadically, revealing glimpses of rusted pipes and decades-old graffiti. But every flash of light also revealed the shadow behind us, Silas gaining ground inch by inch. Callum clenched his jaw, his face pale and slick with sweat. He muttered that Silas never broke pursuit, not until the target stopped running. There was no surrender, no negotiation, no mercy. I could hear the resignation building in his voice, the weight of exhaustion dragging him down. But I wasn't ready to let him fall. I'd seen men break. I'd seen men give up. Callum wasn't done, not on my watch. A faint rumble shuddered through the walls as we hit a lower section of the tunnel. The ceiling dipped, forcing me to duck instinctively even though I knew the cab wouldn't hit it. Loose debris rattled against the roof and a crack zigzagged across the concrete overhead like lightning frozen in stone. Callum lifted his head again, eyes darting as if searching for something in the dark. When he spotted it, his voice sharpened. Ahead, the tunnel split. Left led deeper underground, pitch black, dead still. Right led upward toward daylight, narrow, steep, dangerous. But as we drew closer, I noticed something else. A series of metal beams braced the ceiling above the right path, old and rotting. Weak, Callum pointed, his voice strained but urgent. He told me if I hit the base of those beams hard enough, we might cause a partial cave-in, something temporary, something that could trap Silas inside just long enough to escape. It wasn't a guarantee, it wasn't even smart, but it was our only chance. Silas's car closed in behind us, the sound of its engine ricocheting through the tunnel like a monster clawing closer. His headlights grew brighter, swallowing more of the darkness. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, and lined up the rig with the right passage. The incline ahead glowed faintly with approaching sunlight. Freedom. But freedom came with a price. I floored the accelerator. The rig roared, surging forward like a charging bull. Callum braced himself, eyes locked on the beams. The black car accelerated too, desperate to close the last few yards. When we hit the incline, the rig slammed into the support structure with a bone-rattling crash. Metal tore, concrete shrieked. The tunnel shuddered violently. Screams of twisting steel echoed behind us as the beams buckled. Callum looked back, hope flickering in his eyes. Then the ceiling began to collapse. But Silas didn't stop, not even then. The moment the beams snapped, the tunnel roared like a living beast. Dust exploded upward in thick clouds, choking the air. Chunks of concrete rained down behind us, slamming onto the hood of Silas Corrin's car with enough force to dent steel. The sound was deafening. Metal buckling, walls trembling, the ceiling groaning under its own collapsing weight. For a heartbeat, it looked like the cave-in would swallow everything behind us. But Silas didn't brake. He accelerated. Through the shifting dust, his headlights cut two sharp lines, piercing the chaos like the eyes of something that didn't understand the concept of fear. His car swerved left, then right, dodging falling debris with impossible reflexes. Sparks burst as chunks of concrete scraped across his windshield. A massive slab crashed onto the trunk, crushing the back half of the vehicle. But he kept coming, engines screaming in defiance of physics and survival. Callum stared in disbelief, breath ragged. He whispered that Silas wasn't just trained, he was conditioned. The unit built men who didn't hesitate, didn't retreat, didn't panic. Pain didn't slow them. Logic didn't guide them. Only mission, only objective. A single consuming directive: complete the hunt. As the tunnel collapsed in a wave of dust and rubble, I pushed the rig harder up the steep ramp toward daylight. The incline rattled the cab, the trailer straining against gravity. The sun grew brighter ahead, a blinding circle of white hope cutting through the darkness. My lungs burned with every breath, diesel fumes thickening in the cab, but the sound behind us was worse. Metal scraping, tires shrieking, the monstrous roar of Silas's engine refusing to die. More debris crashed behind us. A wall fragment shattered across the hood of his car, ripping half the grille away. Still, he kept driving. The man was relentless, possessed by something colder than duty. Callum forced himself upright, wincing as blood soaked through his shirt. His voice dropped to a whisper. He said one thing mattered now: sunlight. If the tunnel sealed behind us completely, Silas would lose visibility and momentum. Even he couldn't outrun a falling world forever. The ramp steepened, my engine growling in agony as I coaxed every ounce of strength from her battered heart. The walls blurred beside us. Lights flickered overhead, and the rumble of collapsing stone chased us like an avalanche determined to swallow our names. The opening widened, just feet ahead now, its glow stretching across the cab in burning streaks of gold. Then something slammed into the back of the trailer, hard. The entire rig lurched forward, jarring my spine. I looked in the mirror and nearly cursed aloud. Silas had rammed us, with a half-crushed car, in a collapsing tunnel. The front end of his vehicle was mangled, the hood bent upward like twisted wings, smoke pouring from the engine, and yet his dead-eyed determination pushed the wreck onward. Callum gasped, gripping the seat. He whispered that Silas wasn't trying to overtake us. He was trying to force us to lose control, to flip, to die before daylight. I gritted my teeth and held the wheel steady as cracks split along the ceiling above Silas, raining dust in thick gray bursts. The tunnel shook. A support beam snapped like a gunshot, and then light exploded around us as the rig burst out of the tunnel, tires skidding onto sun-baked pavement. The sudden brightness punched my vision, forcing me to squint as heat washed over my face. Fresh air hit my lungs like a lifeline. Behind us, the tunnel groaned one final time. A thunderous collapse swallowed the entrance in a cloud of dust and pulverized concrete. Silas's car did not emerge. The world fell silent as I slowed the rig to a grinding halt, chest heaving, heart trying to claw its way out of my ribs. Callum sagged in the seat beside me, eyes fluttering, face drained of color. He whispered one fragile sentence: "He's not dead." And the way he said it made me believe him. The sun hit us like a hammer the moment we cleared the tunnel. Heat shimmered across the pavement, bending the horizon into wavering lines. I let the rig roll forward until we were far enough from the dust cloud that the engine could breathe again, then eased her into a slow crawl. The silence after the collapse felt unnatural, too still, too clean. No echoes, no pursuit. But Callum's labored breathing told me everything the quiet refused to. Silas Corrin didn't die in that tunnel. Callum pressed his palm against the cracked passenger window, staring back at the mound of rubble sealing off the entrance. His voice shook as he said Silas had survived worse, that the unit trained men to push past pain the way most people push past a sneeze. He said Silas would claw his way through concrete if it meant completing the mission, and from the haunted look in his eyes, I believed every word. The highway stretched ahead in a long, empty ribbon of sun-beaten asphalt. No shade for miles, no towns, no witnesses. A perfect place for a dying man to bleed out, or for a predator to reappear without warning. Callum's head dipped forward, sweat dripping from his temple as he fought to stay conscious. His wound had soaked through half his side now, the dark patch blooming through layers of fabric like a spreading storm. I told him we needed help, real help, a hospital, a ranger station, anything with supplies and a chance at survival. But he grabbed my sleeve, fingers trembling, and told me absolutely not. He said the unit monitored emergency responses, hospitals, police calls, ambulances. They'd intercept us before the first IV bag hung, and anyone who tried to help us would end up on Silas's list. The weight of that hit hard. I'd driven long enough to know the road held danger, but the kind that stalked us now, the kind trained to erase lives cleanly, was a different beast. My throat tightened when I looked over and saw Callum's eyes glassing over. He wasn't just hurt, he was fading. The heat outside intensified, radiating through the windshield in waves. Mirage-like ripples danced above the pavement. Far off in the distance, a ridge of mesas carved jagged lines across the sky like broken teeth. The world looked bigger and more merciless under the noon sun. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept moving, pushing the rig toward any scrap of advantage we could find. Callum forced himself upright again, his breath shallow but determined. He said Silas wouldn't attack immediately, not now that the tunnel had collapsed, not without regrouping. The man didn't act on impulse. He hunted with strategy, cutting off escape routes, isolating targets, exhausting them mentally before striking physically. He said our best chance was to reach a place where the road forked, a junction he knew of, a dirt access path used by transmission workers, a path too narrow for the black car, a place where Silas would have to get out on foot. I wasn't sure which option was worse. A car like his could crush us without warning, but a man like him, hunting on foot, meant close-quarters violence, flesh and bone and no distance to soften the blows, and Callum was in no condition to fend off anything. My chest tightened with the weight of that realization. If Silas caught up to us, I'd be the only line between them. The highway curved gently right, dust swirling across the lanes as a warm breeze kicked up from the east. A faded road sign emerged from the shimmer ahead, leaning at an angle like it had given up long ago. Callum squinted, trying to read it through dimming vision. When he recognized the name, he exhaled a quiet, broken sigh. We were close, too close, because just as I passed the sign, the CB radio crackled to life on the dashboard, dead for hours since the transmitter blew. A voice slid through the static, low, cold, familiar. You should have kept driving when you found him. Silas, alive, already out of the tunnel, and closer than either of us imagined. The moment Silas's voice slithered through the CB radio, the temperature inside the cab seemed to drop 10 degrees. Callum stiffened, fingers clenched around the door handle as if bracing for a blow. The voice was wrong, too steady, too controlled for a man who'd just driven through a collapsing tunnel. There was no strain, no effort, only purpose, sharpened like a blade held against the throat of the world. Static crackled again, then cleared just enough for his next sentence to cut through. You're making this harder than it needs to be. My stomach twisted. He wasn't guessing our position. He wasn't searching. He was tracking us through a frequency that shouldn't have worked. Not after the transmitter blew out the cabin circuits. Callum's eyes widened with sick realization. He said the unit didn't just rely on vehicles. They used signal piggybacking, hopping onto dormant communication bands to lock onto a target's location. If Silas was speaking to us now, he wasn't behind us. He was nearby. Too nearby. I killed the CB with a hard yank on the cables. The radio died with a sharp pop, sizzling faintly. The air filled with a suffocating silence. No engines, no static, nothing but the thrum of the road beneath the wheels. Callum reached for the dash, his hand trembling violently. He pointed out the window toward a cluster of sandstone outcrops rising from the desert like jagged wounds in the earth. That was our turnoff, the service junction, the only shot we had left. The rig groaned as I took the narrow path, tires grinding across loose gravel. Dust spiraled behind us in a long plume, catching the harsh light of the midday sun. The access road twisted between rock formations, dipping into shallow ravines before climbing again. It was barely wide enough for the truck, and every bump sent fresh shockwaves through the trailer. Callum gritted his teeth to stifle a cry of pain as the cab bounced over a deep rut. But for the first time since dawn, we had one advantage. Silas's car couldn't follow. I slowed the rig near a break in the rock face where a string of maintenance sheds stood, sun-faded and half-buried in sand. Old chain-link fencing rattled in the breeze. The place felt abandoned, dead quiet, stripped of human presence for years. But it was shelter. It was cover. It was a place to breathe for 5 seconds, maybe 10. I parked the rig in the shadow of a large boulder, engine idling low. Callum slumped in the seat, consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. Sweat rolled down his temple, mixing with the blood that stained his shirt. I needed to get him inside one of the sheds. Shade, water, anything. But as I stepped out of the cab, something in the air shifted. A sound, soft, wrong. Footsteps, not behind us, above us. The rocks. Callum's voice cracked through the open door, raw and terrified. He found a way up. I looked to the ridgeline just as a figure stepped into view, silhouetted against the blinding sky. Silas Corrin, dust-covered, torn jacket, blood at the corner of his mouth, but alive, standing tall, eyes empty, movement fluid. A beast built from muscle, training, and obsession. He started descending with slow, deliberate steps, keeping one hand on the rocky slope. No weapon drawn. He didn't need one. His presence alone was a threat carved out of iron. I grabbed a tire iron from the side compartment, the metal burning hot from the sun, and braced myself as he approached. Every instinct screamed to run, but Callum was barely holding on to life, and Silas wasn't here for negotiations. He reached the base of the rocks and paused, breathing steady, expression unbroken. He tilted his head at me, studying the weapon in my grip like it was a child's toy. You should move, he said calmly. You're not part of this. I didn't move. His jaw flexed barely, but enough. You made yourself part. He lunged. Faster than a man his size should move. Faster than instinct could process. The impact threw me back, my boots skidding in the sand. The tire iron flew from my grip, landing somewhere behind me. Pain exploded across my ribs as Silas's hand closed around my collar. His strength was monstrous, refined, deliberate. He hauled me up as if I weighed nothing and threw a punch that would have ended the fight if I hadn't turned my head at the last second. The world tilted. Sand filled my mouth. Vision blurred. But I wasn't done. I grabbed a fistful of gravel and threw it into his eyes. The moment he flinched, even slightly, I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving, pain radiating through every breath. Silas wiped his eyes once, then stepped forward again, more irritated than hurt. Before he could reach me, a gunshot cracked through the dry air. Silas staggered, not from injury, from surprise. Callum was standing in the shed doorway, barely upright, gun shaking in his hand. His voice rasped out, broken, but defiant. "Try me again, and I'll put the next one in your skull." Silas turned toward him, slow, wide-shouldered, danger simmering beneath his calm, and I knew. Round 2 was about to begin. Silas didn't flinch at the sight of the gun. He stood tall in the heat haze shimmer, sweat and dust clinging to his skin, a man carved from discipline and cruelty. The only sign the bullet had rattled him was the subtle shift of his jaw. Callum's hands trembled violently, but the barrel stayed aimed, defiance holding him up where his dying body couldn't. I stepped between them instinctively, breath ragged, ribs aching, sand stuck to the blood on my lip. Silas's eyes flicked to me, cold, measuring, before returning to Callum like I wasn't worth the energy it would take to kill me first. Callum's voice cracked again, raw and fading. He told Silas he knew what the unit had planned, what they were going to unleash, who they were going to silence to make it happen. He said he'd burned the last bridge they needed, that killing him wouldn't fix anything anymore. Silas didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "You shouldn't have run." His voice was empty of emotion but not empty of meaning. This wasn't personal. It was ritual, a grim responsibility carried out by a man who'd surrendered his soul long ago. One mission, one ending. I stepped closer, positioning myself fully in Silas's path. I told him he'd have to go through me. His eyes narrowed, not with rage but with irritation, like a mechanic forced to deal with a stubborn bolt before finishing the real job. He moved faster than my eyes could track, his fist slamming into my ribs. Pain detonated through my side. My knees buckled, but I stayed upright, gripping his arm and using my weight to drag him sideways. He shifted, effortlessly countering, sending us both stumbling across the dry ground in a violent tangle. Callum fired again, the gunshot echoing off the rocks. Silas dodged, the bullet grazing his arm, ripping cloth and flesh. For the first time, I heard him breathe harder. Not fear, not pain, effort. He twisted away from me and charged toward Callum, boots pounding against the sand. Callum's hand shook too hard to fire again. His knees buckled. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering against the ground. Silas reached him, but before he could strike, I grabbed the tire iron from the dirt, swung with everything the road had ever taught me. Every fight, every long night, every life I'd watched crumble on the highway. The metal connected with Silas's shoulder in a sickening crack. He stumbled. I hit him again, and on the third swing he caught the iron midair, his grip unbreakable. He yanked it from my hands and slammed the butt of it into my chest, knocking the breath out of me. I fell to my knees, choking, vision blurring from the sun and exhaustion. Silas turned back toward Callum. The agent stood now only by leaning on the shed doorframe, eyes hollow, skin gray. But his voice, shaking, dying, still carried enough strength to stop Silas mid-step. He said the files were gone, distributed, backed up, already in the hands of people who would expose the unit's entire operation. Silas stared at him. A long, dangerous silence followed. Then, for the first and only time, I saw something like uncertainty crack the edges of Silas's mask. Not fear, not remorse. Purpose interrupted. Callum's knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground. Silas took a slow step toward him, not to finish the job, but to confirm the truth. I pushed myself between them again, arms wide even though my body was half broken. Silas's eyes landed on me with a depth that chilled bone. The man weighed his options. Kill us both and hope the data trail died with Callum's last breath, or walk away from a mission whose objective no longer had meaning. The desert wind shifted, carrying dust across the ground in small spirals. A hawk screeched overhead, circling the ridge. Silas looked at Callum, really looked, and something in him finally yielded. Not forgiveness, not defeat, something colder. The acceptance of a mission dissolved. Without a word, he stepped back. He turned toward the rocks, toward the long climb out of the access road, and began walking. No threats, no promises, just footsteps fading into heat and silence. The kind of exit made by men who don't disappear, they wait for the next hunt. I dropped beside Callum, lifting him into my arms as his head rested against my shoulder. His breathing was shallow, quicksand pulling at him with every passing second. He whispered that none of this was supposed to fall on me. I told him it didn't matter. Out here on the road, you don't choose the people you protect. The road chooses. He gave a faint smile, weak, but real, and passed out. I carried him into the shade of the shed, laid him on a dusty workbench, and checked his pulse. Faint, fading, but there. I patched him the best I could with the supplies stashed in my rig. And when he finally stirred again, hours later, the sun was beginning to drop behind the mesas, painting the world in bruised gold. He wasn't safe, neither of us were. The unit wouldn't forget what happened, but for the first time since dawn, the silence around us felt like peace instead of warning. I helped him into the cab, started the engine. The rig rumbled to life, strong and stubborn. We drove, toward the nearest town, toward help, toward whatever future the truth had earned. If you've been with me through this whole story, through the dust, the danger, the hunt, stick with me a little longer. Hit that like button so stories like this don't vanish into the dark. Subscribe so you can ride with me on the next long road, where justice is quiet, but it's mine to protect. And if you're still listening, then you're part of this journey now. I'll see you on the next mile.